morning, I opened the front door to find my new daughter-in-law, Vanessa, standing there with a man I had never seen before. He was carrying a leather briefcase. She was carrying a smile that did not reach her eyes. Before I could even ask what this was about, he stepped into my kitchen and placed a thick folder on the table. Across the top of the first page, in bold letters, were the words, "Power of Attorney." Vanessa leaned forward as though this were nothing more than a neighborly visit. Her voice was sweet, practiced. She said, "We just want you to be safe, Mom. We want to protect you." I sat down slowly. I did not touch the folder. Instead, I looked at the steam curling up from my teacup. My silence must have unnerved them, but they did not know that silence had always been my strongest weapon. Inside my head, one truth roared louder than any words I could have spoken. $53 million. That is what Harold left me when he died. Money earned over decades of sacrifice, of living below our means, of saying no when others said yes. A fortune I had never mentioned, not even to our son. Before his last breath, Harold had pressed my hand and whispered, "Do not tell them. Not yet. One day you will understand why." Now, staring at Vanessa's polished nails, tapping the folder, I understood exactly why. This was the day he had prepared me for. I wanted to laugh, but instead I let the moment hang heavy, like a curtain between us. My son's wife thought she was guiding me gently into a cage, locking the door with legal language I could never undo. But she underestimated the quiet strength of a woman who had been dismissed too many times, who had learned that sometimes you win, not by shouting, but by waiting. And as I watched the lawyer clear his throat, I felt something shift inside me. The wedding reception only days earlier came flooding back. The band had been playing. Glasses clinked. My son, Daniel, danced with his bride beneath chandeliers and roses. Where was I? At table 14, behind a column of flowers, my view of the dance floor blocked as though my presence did not matter. I had smiled politely, but in truth, I was hidden in plain sight. That was the night I stayed silent about my inheritance. And thank God I did. Because if I had spoken, if I had shared that truth, then by the time I opened this door, I would already have nothing left. This is where my story begins. The day I realized that silence had saved me. The day my daughter-in-law arrived with a lawyer at my door, expecting me to surrender everything. If you feel this story already pulling you in, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you will not miss the rest of what happened next. I promise you, it only gets more powerful from here. My name is Diane Whitmore. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I live in Portland, Oregon. For most of my life, I kept books at a small hardware store on Alberta Street. It paid the bills and let me be home by dinner. Before that and during it, I spent 40 years as Harold's wife. Harold was a quiet man with careful hands. He measured twice, cut once, and saved the leftover screws in coffee tins. He believed in patching before replacing. People called it thrift. I called it faith that a life could survive any weather. The house we bought in our 20s still creaks in winter. Pipes sigh. Windows chatter when east wind climbs the hill. Out back is the rose garden Harold planted after his father died. He said grief needs something to tend. The canes lean on a simple fence. He mended it each spring in his plaid shirt, sleeves rolled, pencil behind his ear. That shirt hangs in my closet like a quiet flag. When I touch the fabric, I feel his patience again. the slow rhythm of a man who knew how to keep storms outside and peace inside at night. I keep the house by routines Harold would recognize. Sweep the porch on Tuesdays, wash the kettle on Fridays, deadhead the roses when the light is kind. My hands remember the ledger, columns, totals, reconciling cents until they rest. At the hardware store, I learned that order calms fear. When numbers match, the world feels safe. Harold taught the same lesson with wood and wire. Fix the hinge, oil the lock, wait before buying new. We did not chase vacations or granite counters. We stacked small choices like bricks. People called it plain. We called it freedom that survived bills. 40 years with Harold felt like a long, sturdy bench beneath a maple tree. He did not raise his voice. He raised beams, raised tomatoes, raised our son with the same steady grip. When money was tight, he brought home salvage boards and made shelves. When my mother fell ill, he learned to cook simple soups. He saved receipts in envelopes and screws in jars. He believed waste was a kind of disrespect. If he had a religion, it was care. Not grand gestures, small repairs, done right, done now. People trusted him because nothing he promised came cheap ever. After Harold died, the house went quiet in a new way. Even the clock seemed to tick with a softer courage. I slept on his side for a while, then drifted back to mine. The roses kept blooming because plants do not bargain with grief. I learned the weight of afternoons. Daniel visited less once the engagement was set. His life widened while mine narrowed. He was polite and distracted. Calls on speaker while driving, messages sent late and brief. When I asked how he was, he said fine. When he asked how I was, I said fine too then. I kept dressing in the morning as if someone might stop by. Cardigan buttoned, hair brushed, kettle polished until it shone. The hardware store retired me with a sheet cake and a gift card. I thanked them and went home to my ledger habits. I still balanced numbers on scrap paper, groceries against pensions, utilities against the comfort of turning on the porch light early. The radio filled the kitchen with weather and baseball. Clara next door waved from her mailbox. We spoke about roses and the price of eggs. When the sun dipped, I locked the door and listened. On clear days, I sat by the back steps and looked at the fence Harold kept mending. I could see him there, plaid shirt, sleeves up, pencil behind his ear, measuring the sag and saying it was nothing patience could not fix. Daniel used to pass him nails from a coffee tin, hands eager, eyes copying his father. I remember the day Daniel was tall enough to hold the level. Harold smiled like sunrise. Those images stay plain as photographs. I keep them close because they tell the truth about us. We built slow, with care, and called it enough. As months turned, invitations arrived with dates and dress codes. Daniel and Vanessa charted a life of venues and menus. I ironed my navy dress and circled the day on the calendar. I told myself, distance is normal. Children drift, then return when the tide changes. I set the table for one and learned to bless the silence between meals. When a board creaked at night, I pictured Harold walking the hall, and I slept easier. I did not know how quickly politeness could become strategy, how quickly love could be measured in signatures. I only knew to be ready. The church smelled like lilies and floor polish, the kind of shine that turns every step into a whisper. I arrived early, and a young usher guided me through the reception hall. He stopped by a round table near a marble column, checked his clipboard, and announced Table 14. The centerpiece rose like a trimmed tree, glass and pale roses stacked high enough to hide a person. I sat and realized the column and the flowers made a perfect wall. My world was petals and the thin sound of other people's joy. If I leaned left, I caught a sliver of the aisle. If I leaned right, I saw the corner of the head table and one edge of the cake. Between those angles, only leaves and light. I straightened my fork and knife and pretended privacy was my choice. Across the room, mothers were seated near the cameras. A seat is a chair on a diagram, I told myself, not a verdict. Marjorie, Vanessa's mother, arrived with the timing of a stage actress. Guests praised the flowers and the quartet. She accepted with a small, practiced dip of the head. She hugged Daniel, pressed her cheek to his, and lifted her eyes to chart the room. Host, curator, queen. I understood my placement in a kingdom that preferred symmetry over intimacy. The officiant cleared his throat. The quartet began the processional. Vanessa appeared at the far doors in a gown that made the room hush. I tilted until the column cut the frame like a curtain. The veil drifted like a pale river, then slid out of my sightline. Daniel stood with that mixture of pride and fear men wear when a life is about to be rearranged. I thought of the day he held the level for Harold and how his hands shook. A woman sat beside me without asking. She said she was a cousin on Marjorie's side and asked for the powder room. I pointed to the lobby. She glanced at my place card and said, "Oh, you are Daniel's mother. How sweet." Then she explained the signature cocktail as if teaching a child, and drifted away. The vows floated around the column like a radio signal from another town. I caught the words that always matter, for better, for worse, for as long as we both shall live. I repeated them and felt the weight Harold and I had carried across ordinary years. People think vows are fireworks. Harold knew they are plumbing, patience, and the long drive home after bad news. The kiss drew cheers. I clapped into the greenery and felt petals brush my wrists. Cocktail hour rose like a tide toward the bar. A waiter set down appetizers that looked like jewelry. Daniel approached, and Marjorie steered him toward a couple in navy suits. "Opportunity is waiting," her smile said. I practiced being present without interruption. An usher asked if I needed anything. I asked if the arrangement could shift an inch so I might see the first dance. He studied the flowers like an altar and apologized. "Fire code," he said. I asked for a cushion instead. He brought one quickly and looked relieved I had not asked him to break a rule. Daniel found me long enough to kiss my forehead and promised to return after the toasts. "You look handsome," I said. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, the words falling like coins through a slot. Precise, correct, already spent. I chose a blessing over a question and let him go. The grand entrance began. Everyone rose. I stood a beat late, caught between chair and column. The couple took the floor. All I saw was a border of lace and the brief plane of Daniel's shoulder. I applauded too. My hands met and parted like a quiet metronome. I smiled because smiling costs nothing and prevents explanations. Dinner arrived with speeches. Marjorie's toast sparkled. She thanked everyone for honoring the union of two families and told a story about Vanessa rescuing a stray dog in college. Laughter and sniffles followed. When it was my turn, I kept it brief. I spoke of Daniel's first toolbox and the day he learned to keep the bubble between the lines. I lifted my glass and sat before anyone could decide how they felt about me. As cake was plated, I understood my assignment. I had been placed where I could do no harm to the photographs. A quiet placeholder to complete the grid. A photographer asked me to lean toward the aisle so the lens could catch a sliver of my smile. I obliged. The image would confirm the chart, present enough to count, distant enough not to alter the frame. When the dancing swelled again, I remained in my chair and watched. Lights spin across the ceiling like coins in a fountain. The music gathered people into circles that opened and closed without me. I did not take it personally. I counted beats, mapped exits, and rehearsed the line I use when leaving early is the dignified choice. I am fine. I am happy for them. I will get a ride. Still quietly. In the space behind the column, my son laughed. I held that sound like a lighthouse in a storm, a small, fixed point telling me where I was on a night that insisted I was only filling a seat. Harold gave me the key on a Wednesday night, the last evening he knew my name. The nurse lowered the lamp. Rain tapped the window. He reached into his robe and pressed a brass key into my palm, warm from his body, smelling of cedar and machine oil. His voice thinned. He said, "Keep this safe. Use it when you need to, not when you are begged or shamed. Promise you will remember that." I closed my fingers around the metal and felt the map of our years. A nick near the teeth showed where he slipped with a file. Harold never left marks by accident. He studied problems until they let go. He would not hand me a key unless a door wanted resolve. I put it in my sweater pocket and sat beside him. I watched his chest row a current and kept my hand on his shoulder. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and advice. I stacked pans and recycled pamphlets. Grief made the house larger, as if every hallway led to a room where I was not. The key waited on the saucer where Harold kept screws and paper clips. On the 5th day, I carried it downstairs. The basement smelled of cardboard and cold concrete. Behind the pegboard, a panel hid a safe bolted to studs. I lifted the panel and found the lock. The brass face matched the key. My hands trembled. I steadied them on the bench. The key slid in and turned with a quiet click. When I opened the door, the air changed to dry paper and the faint trace of his cologne. He had folded the world into manila, binders labeled insurance, taxes, and pensions. A blue folder lay on top like a patch of sky. Inside the blue folder was a letter in his careful print, the same hand that labeled coffee tins and fuse boxes. "My dearest Diane," it began. "If you are reading this, I am not beside you to explain. I have prepared what I could, and the rest is your judgment." He told me to call Carl Jensen, our old neighbor who became an attorney. Then the line that stopped me. This is armor, not bragging. There were statements, charts, and a trust agreement stamped by a notary. I had seen invoices and pay stubs for decades, never numbers like these. $53 million held in an irrevocable trust in my name. Distributions protected from anyone who might speak for me without consent. The clauses read like a fortress. If anyone sought power of attorney without medical proof of incapacity, assets would be insulated. Mercy written with a steel spine. I sat on the wooden stool Harold used for sanding and let the pages rest against my knees. Upstairs, the washer clicked to a stop, and the house held its breath. What unsettled me was knowing he built this while laughing at coupons and choosing cheap seats. He hid abundance in plain sight and kept repairing fences. I brushed his signature and felt the last lesson. Protection can be humble and strong. The letter continued. He reminded me of the month my mother was ill, and he slept on a hospital chair. He wrote that a family is guarded not by speeches, but by paperwork and steady hands. He apologized for secrecy and refused shame. He said love sometimes requires silence until the right question is asked by the right person. He asked me to forgive him for dying first and for being right about kindness read as weakness. At the bottom, he wrote a sentence in the plain language he used for hard choices. If you say nothing, you will see who speaks for you. I pressed the page to my chest and let the light blur. A small envelope was clipped to the letter. Inside was a spare key and a photograph of us at the county fair. I wore a sun hat. He held lemonade. The corner was creased. I returned the documents to the safe in the order he set. I kept the letter and the contact card in a folder marked Recipes. I turned the key, slid the panel back, and wiped my fingerprints from the brass. On the stairs, I sat halfway up and breathed. The house felt no different. The refrigerator hummed. The roses scratched the kitchen window where the trellis needed a nail. Nothing had changed, and everything had. I told no one. Not Clara, though she would have understood. Not Daniel, though he is my child. Secrets rot when they are built to flatter. This one was built to shield. I honored Harold by treating it as a tool, not a trumpet. I put the spare key in the sewing basket under the spools. I tucked the letter into my Bible between Psalms and Proverbs. That night, I slept with the window cracked so the rain could remember us. I laid Harold's plaid shirt at the foot of the bed and thanked him. Money is only time made visible. With it, you can buy quiet, buy patience, and permission to say no. In the morning, I would make coffee and sweep the porch as if this knowledge were ordinary. I would practice silence until it saved me and use the armor without apology. I would keep faith with the work that built this house steady. 3 days after the wedding, the doorbell rang while the kettle sighed on the stove. I wiped my hands and opened the door to find Vanessa with a man in a gray suit. She wore a cream coat and a magazine smile. He carried a briefcase. Vanessa stepped in, and the man handed me a card. Andrew Pike, attorney at law. We were just in the neighborhood, Vanessa said, as if the neighborhood included conference rooms. We thought it would be helpful to go over a few protective documents for you. Her tone was warm. Her eyes were measuring. The lawyer nodded with practiced gravity and asked if we could sit at the kitchen table. I let them in and set 3 cups on the table because manners never expire. I poured black tea. Vanessa thanked me without tasting it. The lawyer opened his briefcase and set a folder in the center. Across the top page, bold type read, "Power of Attorney and Healthcare Proxy." He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is a standard set of instruments. They authorize your son and his spouse to assist with financial and medical decisions should the need arise. This is best practice for seniors who live alone." He smiled, as if my consent were assumed. I stirred my tea. The spoon tapped once, then rested. He kept speaking about safeguards, efficiencies, and avoiding confusion. Vanessa added that Daniel was worried about me. She said worried 3 times, as if repetition could become truth. Her hand settled on the folder. I asked whether they were in a hurry. Vanessa glanced at the lawyer. "We have some time," she said. I nodded and let the room be quiet. The clock clicked. The heater exhaled. People will fill a quiet room with the shape of their intentions if you let them, and these 2 did not like the shape they made. The lawyer resumed. "With your authorization, Daniel can help streamline payments and investments. This is a burden you should not have to carry." We can get a notary here today. He said today, as if it were superior to all others. Vanessa leaned forward. It would give us peace of mind, she said. I sipped the tea. It was too hot. I let the heat settle and did not react. I asked who drafted the documents. The lawyer said his firm adapted a template he uses for many families. I asked how many of those families began by seating a mother at table 14 behind a floral column. Vanessa blinked. The lawyer frowned. I did not mention the safe or the letter or the number I carry like a stone. I lifted the top page and read the first paragraph. The language was gentle and absolute. It invited me to step out of my own life. I set it down and folded my hands. Thank you for bringing this, I said. I appreciate the concern. Before any signatures, I will have my attorney review every line. The lawyer's pen paused above the flag. Your attorney, he repeated. Yes, I said. His name is Carl Jensen. He is thorough. I will call him after lunch. Vanessa's smile thinned. She said, of course, trying to sound open-minded. The lawyer adjusted his tie and said there was urgency, because timing can affect evaluations and asset protection. I let that sentence sit where everyone could see it. Then I asked whether urgency meant before I had the chance to ask proper questions. He began to explain aging curves and statutes. I raised one finger. Do not rush me. I will not sign anything I have not read twice. Vanessa's hand slid off the folder. She reached for her teacup and finally tasted it. I watched her decide whether sweetness could fix the moment. The lawyer tried a softer path and asked if Daniel could join a follow-up meeting. I said Daniel is welcome to visit his mother any afternoon. If he wishes to discuss signatures, he may do so in the presence of my counsel. They both heard the line they had hoped not to hear. The lawyer closed the folder a fraction. He said he admired my diligence. Vanessa set the cup down with care. She said she only wanted me to be safe. I answered that safety begins with a door that locks from the inside. We sat with that until the clock spoke again. The lawyer gathered his papers. He said we would be in touch later this week. At the door, Vanessa squeezed my arm. I have always respected you, she said. I nodded to save her from the echo. The porch light was still off. Daylight held enough truth. I walked them out and watched the briefcase catch the sun like a small shield. In the kitchen, the steam still rose from my cup. I stood a while and let my pulse slow to a practical beat. Harold had told me to wait until the right question was asked by the right person. Today, 2 people had asked the wrong question with great confidence. I rinsed the teaspoons and felt the old brass key in my pocket, like a coin from a country that never falls. Outside, the wind lifted the maple leaves like small green flags today. I looked at the tea, still steaming. The day had finally arrived. Clara found me on the porch the next afternoon, holding a broom I had not used yet. The maple threw coin-sized shadows across the steps. The kettle inside had just clicked off. She carried her mail and a jar of peonies. She set the jar on the rail and looked at me. You did not come back for cake last night, she said. I told her I had a headache. She stepped closer. Did they put you behind the flowers? She asked. I nodded. She breathed out and let the quiet do the scolding. Clara is a widow. Her Jack died in winter. She speaks in short sentences and lists. She touched the broom. I saw that girl with a lawyer on your porch, she said. I told her there had been a visit. She waited. I let the silence gather until the air felt heavier than the glass jar. Finally, she gave me the line I did not know I needed. "You are not invisible." She said it like a fact. The words traveled through skin and manners and the armor I had held since the wedding. My throat moved once, then twice. Tears came without apology, clean and steady, like a faucet finally unstuck. Clara did not flinch. She guided me to the top step. "Cry," she said. "Let the wind see it." I pressed my palm under my eye and gave a short laugh because the navy dress from the church still hangs on the bedroom door like a guest who refuses to leave. I told Clara about Table 14, the column, the vase that became a wall. I told her about the folder on my table and the lawyer who said today as if time belonged to him. She listened as if my sentences were nails handed across a fence. When I finished, she patted my arm the way you calm a horse. "They want you small because you make their story messy," she said. "You are not small." I thought of Harold measuring a sagging line and saying it could be fixed. My breath began to match the maple leaves moving above us. Inside, the house waited with its old patience. I left the broom and went to the bedroom. The closet smelled faintly of cedar and starch. Harold's plaid shirt hung where I left it. Sleeves rolled, collar softened by years. I slid it from the hanger and pressed it to my face. The fabric carried his Sunday cologne, citrus and wood, soap and effort. I stood very still and let memory take the lead. For months I had kept grief on a short leash. I feared if I let go, I would not find the way back. The shirt asked nothing. It returned a man to a room. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the cuff with my thumb. I saw Harold teaching Daniel to sand with the grain. The boy's forearms dusted pale. Harold patient as a tide. I remembered the night Harold pressed a brass key into my palm. The scent on his wrist was the same as on this cloth. He whispered, "Use it when you need to, not when you are begged or shamed." I whispered back that I would. In the closet light, the plaid looked like a map, each line a street we had walked, the pocket a place to keep a note you do not want to lose. Clara stood in the doorway with the peonies. "Keep these in the kitchen," she said. "Let the house know it is still being lived in. If they come again, call me before you answer." I told her I would. I stayed with the shirt. I folded it the way Harold liked, sleeves tucked, buttons aligned. I set it on the chair where he used to drop his keys. The keys are gone. The chair remains. The silence had changed since Clara spoke. It no longer felt like exile. It felt like space held open for a choice. I washed my face, put on lipstick, and brewed new tea. In the steam, I heard Harold's instruction. Do not waste yourself proving you exist. When the kettle clicked again, I carried a cup to the porch. The broom leaned where I left it. I picked it up and began to sweep. Each stroke gathered leaves and grit into a small line. I breathed and kept sweeping gently there. Work steadied me. Order returned to the boards. Across the hedge, Clara's kitchen light came on. I knew she would watch this night and the next. I said the words aloud to let the air hold them with me. I am not invisible. The maple kept its counsel. The street stayed ordinary. That was enough to begin. My son knocked on a Tuesday evening while the porch light was off. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Daniel stood there alone in a thin jacket, keys turning on a ring like a worrystone. I stepped back to let him in. The house smelled like black tea and lemon oil. He sat at the kitchen table. I poured him a mug and waited. When he finally spoke, the words came careful. "Vanessa thinks we should get the paperwork done," he said. just to be safe, in case something happens. He nudged the mug, but did not drink. I took my chair across from him. I asked which paperwork. He said the kind Andrew brought. Power of attorney. Healthcare proxy. It would make everything smooth. He used that word like a promise. Smooth for whom? I asked. For all of us, he said. I let the silence spread between us. You know I have handled my own bills for decades, I said. I kept ledgers for a store with more accounts than this house will ever see. He nodded quickly. Of course, you are great with numbers. This is not about numbers, Mom. It is about safety. I stirred my tea, then set the spoon down. Safety is a good word, I said. It has many owners. Tell me the truth, Daniel. Do you believe I need those documents now? Or are you afraid to disappoint your wife? He looked at me then, really looked. He turned the key ring again. He opened his mouth and closed it. He pressed his lips together and shook his head once, as if erasing a thought he was not allowed to keep. I waited. I kept waiting. Maybe it would help us coordinate, he said. If there were an emergency, we would not have to scramble. Andrew can bring a notary this week. I kept my eyes on his hands. The keys dug into his palm. I knew that grip from the day he learned to drive and held the wheel too tight. Now I said nothing and let him wander to his own conclusion. He did not find it. You are afraid of Vanessa being angry, I said. He glanced toward the hall. She is under stress, he said. The wedding, the move, her job. She worries about you being alone. I nodded. People often rename control as care. He flinched. He reached for the sugar and poured a small mountain into his tea without stirring. He kept his eyes low, avoiding my gaze. He talked to friends. Everyone does this now. Their parents sign. And it is fine. I asked if any of those parents had been seated behind flowers the night their children married. He winced. That was the planner, he said. I did not argue about flowers. I said his name. He looked up. I asked again. Do you truly think I need to sign? Or are you trying to avoid a fight at home? His silence was complete. No defense, no explanation. Only a son who knew the difference and could not say it aloud. I felt something shift inside my chest. A slow tear only I could hear. When he finally spoke, his voice came small. I just want peace, he said. I nodded. Peace is priceless. It is also expensive when you pay for it with someone else's life. He stared at the table. The sugar still sat on the surface of his tea like sand in shallow water. I told him I would have my lawyer review anything put before me. He said, of course, though the word sounded like a closed door. He asked if he could at least bring Andrew by again. I said he could visit me any time, and if Andrew wished to come, he could bring his card and his patience. We sat a while in the room that had once held spelling lists and model airplanes. I wanted to put my hand over his, to tell him I could bear his fear if he would only tell the truth. But the kindest thing I could offer my son was a boundary he could lean against when the wind from his marriage blew too hard. He stood and pushed the chair in with a care that made me proud and sad at once. He said he would call tomorrow. I said I would be here. At the door, he hugged me quickly, his keys pressed cold against my shoulder. After he left, I rinsed the cups and dried them with the dish towel. I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. Harold's plaid shirt hung where I left it. I pressed my face to the sleeve and breathed. The cologne had faded, but not gone. I whispered the question only the dead can hold without judgment. How do I love a son who cannot stand up for me? The room answered in patient air. You love him by standing up for yourself. I folded the shirt and placed it on the chair. Back in the kitchen, the sugar in Daniel's tea was still undissolved. I watched it a moment and then stirred. Sometimes the only mercy you can give is to show how the swirl feels. The spoon traced slow circles until the surface smoothed and the sweetness disappeared into the heat. Vanessa's text arrived at 7:12 a.m., just as the kettle began to hum. "We will swing by Friday with a notary," it read. "Quick signatures. Simple protection. Daniel agrees." I set the phone down and let the whistle climb. When it fell quiet, I typed a single line. "Please wait for my attorney. I did not send. Silence can be a bridge when the other side feels unsafe." I called Carl Jensen on the landline Harold installed before towers ruled the sky. Carl answered on the second ring. I told him about the visit, the folder, the bold words across the top. He listened, then gave me the sentence I needed. "A signature is a battlefield. Never sign with a shaking hand." I chose my kitchen table. Soon he parked and came in with a briefcase and a thermos. He opened a pad. "Let us see what Harold built," he said. I brought the blue folder from the safe and the letter in Harold's neat print. Carl read the trust first. "Irrevocable," he said. "Successor trustee named. Independent physician triggers for any transfer. This is a fortress. We will still check every window." We started with titles. He listed tasks in tidy lines. Retitle the house to the trust. Record a memorandum at the county. Confirm parcel numbers match the deed. He called my bank while I authorized him to speak. He confirmed beneficiary designations and payable on death forms, and added a note: "No changes would be accepted by phone. In person only. 2 employee signatures required." He created a passphrase to verify me that would never travel by email. He examined my existing power of attorney. It was springing and required 2 physicians to declare incapacity. He underlined that twice. "We keep this," he said. "Anyone pressing for a blanket durable power today is not worried about your health. They are worried about access." Medical directives came next. We updated my healthcare proxy. Clara would be first call if I could not speak. Daniel would remain second. Carl added a HIPAA release so doctors could talk to Clara without delay. He suggested a sentence that felt like me. "Diane chooses comfort when cure is futile." Plain words, no room for theater. Identity and account hygiene followed. Carl keeps a checklist for widows. Freeze credit. Set fraud alerts. Add voice passwords. Unlist the landline. Strip my birthday from any page. He said people imagine thieves in alleys. The lazier ones carry clipboards. We reviewed my will. He added a no contest clause firm enough to make an opportunist count to 10. We sealed a letter of instruction naming the safe location, the spare key in the sewing basket, and Carl's cell number. He drafted a card for the door that read, "I never sign documents presented without counsel." By noon, the table looked like a command post. Carl capped his pen and gave me homework. Call the county recorder. Schedule a notary of my choosing for any documents we initiate. Keep a log of every contact from Andrew or Vanessa with date, time, and exact phrasing. He smiled. Logs win arguments with people who polish their memories. Only then did I answer Vanessa. "Please coordinate with my attorney, Carl Jensen. He will schedule any meeting." I sent Carl's office number. 2 minutes later, Andrew replied that Friday was ideal. Carl responded first. "Friday will not work. All communications through counsel. Provide drafts 48 hours in advance." The digital air went still. Carl reached for his coat, then paused. You do not owe anyone a performance of gratitude for protecting yourself, he said. If they call you paranoid, call it prudent. If they call you cruel, call it clear. He squeezed my shoulder and left by the side door. I went to the closet and touched Harold's plaid shirt. The fabric still held a faint trace of his cologne, lemon and pine. I pressed my forehead to the shoulder and thanked him without words. Armor means little until someone teaches you how to wear it. Carl had adjusted the straps. Back at the table, I labeled a folder, Notary Plan. Inside, I placed copies of the trust, the updated proxy, the will, the log sheet, and the door card. I added a pen that writes when stored upside down. Carl says soldiers use them. I wrote the passphrase on an index card and tucked it in my wallet between the library card and a list for rice and apples. Late lights settled across the sink. My phone buzzed again. Vanessa sent a heart and this line. So glad we are on the same page. I let the message sit. A page is not binding until the ink is dry. I rinsed the kettle and set it on the burner. When the flame caught, the house seemed to nod. The maple tapped a rhythm on the glass. The clock kept time. I drafted a note to myself on the yellow pad. Hold your line. Ask for drafts. Speak in complete sentences. I slid it under a magnet on the fridge. Then I squared the stack of papers until the edges aligned. Friday would come when it wished. I would meet it on my terms. I lifted my cup and let the tea burn a clean path down my throat. Warmth is a courage you can make in a kitchen. I sat at the kitchen table long after Carl had gone. The papers neatly stacked in their new folder marked Notary Plan. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the clock above the stove. The silence pressed in, not hostile, but heavy. I reached for the yellow legal pad he had left behind, and instead of making another list, I began to write a letter. Not one I would ever mail, but one my heart demanded. A letter to Harold. My dearest Harold. Tonight, I am writing to you the way I used to when you were away on business trips. Do you remember those short notes I would leave in your suitcase? A folded square of paper, nothing more than a line or two. Be safe. Hurry home. The roses bloomed. Now you are gone, and the distance is not a week or two. It is the rest of my life. Still, I write because it feels like my only way to sit beside you again. Today, your son came to me. Harold. Our son, Daniel. He sat in the chair across from me, twisting his key in his hand like a boy caught lying. He asked me to sign papers. He said it was just to be sure, just to be safe. But what I heard was doubt. He doubts me. Or worse, he fears his wife will be angry if he does not press me. I searched his face for the boy who used to run down the driveway shouting, "Mom, watch me." I found only silence. Do you know what it feels like, Harold, to be questioned in your own kitchen? To have the life you built with someone reduced to a stack of signatures they can slide across a table? I never felt smaller than I did at that moment, watching him struggle to look me in the eyes. And yet, I did not shout. I did not cry in front of him. I saved the tears for you, here, in these lines. You always believed in careful preparation, every check balanced, every receipt filed, every tool put back where it belonged. Order is respect, you used to say. I held on to that today. Carl came, and together we fortified what you left me. The trust you built is sound, Harold. It is a fortress, just like you said. But the battles are not only fought in banks or courts. They are fought inside the heart. And I am tired. I wish you could have been at the wedding. You would have hated the way they tucked me behind that column, Harold. Table 14. I was hidden, as though the years of raising Daniel, of saving pennies, of standing beside you in the orchard, counted for nothing more than a seat filler. Everyone watched Marjorie glow like a queen while I tried to disappear into my chair. I did not want to shame Daniel with my disappointment, so I smiled into my napkin. But inside, I felt like an old coat hung in the wrong closet. I miss your steadiness. I miss the way you would rest your hand on mine when the room felt too loud. No one does that for me now. Clara tries, our neighbor with the gentle voice. She told me this week, "You are not invisible." Her words cracked me open. I sobbed in her kitchen, like a girl. I realized then I have been carrying this loneliness like a stone in my chest. Harold, I am frightened by how Daniel has changed. Or maybe it is not change. Maybe it is weakness exposed. He knows his wife is pushing, and he cannot stand firm against her. I wanted to believe he would protect me the way you once did, but perhaps that was a fantasy only mothers are foolish enough to hold. Still, I will not let bitterness rule me. You taught me that too. When the orchard froze 1 year and we lost nearly everything, you said, "We start again. Soil remembers. My soil remembers, Harold. My heart remembers who I am. I will not sign away the last of my dignity. I touched your shirt today, the plaid one you wore when you mended the fence. It still holds your scent, faint but real. When I pressed it to my face, I could almost hear your voice. I imagined you saying, 'Stand tall, Di. This is only a storm. Let it pass, but do not bend until you break.' I am trying, Harold. I promise you I am trying. I will keep this letter in the safe with the others. Perhaps no one will ever read it, but if someday Daniel finds it after I am gone, maybe he will understand the cost of his silence. Maybe he will know how much his mother loved him, even when that love went unanswered. Good night, Harold. Thank you for the armor you left me. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to wear it. I will hold the line for both of us. Always, Diane." I set the pen down and stared at the words until they blurred. Then I folded the pages carefully and slipped them into the envelope with Harold's letter. The safe closed with its familiar click, and I rested my forehead against the cool steel door. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was a confession made, a truth spoken, if only to the dead. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter, as though Harold had reached through the dark to steady me once more. They came back on a bright afternoon when the maple threw little coins of light across the porch. I saw them through the screen. No attorney, no briefcase, only Daniel with his shoulders bent forward and Vanessa holding her phone like a passport. I opened the door and stepped aside. The house smelled like black tea and furniture polish. I had already set 3 cups. Old habits seat everyone. Vanessa spoke first, before the coats had settled on the hooks. She said they had talked and decided the legal visit last time felt too formal. Families should not need lawyers to love one another. She said the notary could still come Friday. It would be quick, a kindness to me, true peace of mind. She said the pastor at their church recommended clarity. Also, her friend Jenna had done this for her father. It was simple, and everyone slept better. She said Daniel was worried, and she hated to see him crushed between responsibilities. Daniel stood behind her and spun his keyring once. It clicked and stilled. He said he thought it would help. Emergencies happen. No one wants confusion. He looked past my shoulder toward the clock as if the hour could rescue him. I told them to sit. I placed the cups on saucers and did not touch mine. I let the kettle's soft breath be the first voice in the room. Vanessa began listing the documents again. Durable power for finances, medical decisions, a small list of assets that would be easier under one hand. She said it as if pain were a math problem. I listened. When she asked if I agreed, I lifted a palm the way a crossing guard stops a line of cars. I asked one question. Why the hurry? She laughed lightly and said, life is a hurry. The world is unpredictable. No one plans a fall. I asked another question. Why me alone? That one she did not laugh at. She said that because Daniel is my only child, he should be the one. Because I live alone. Because I seem tired. Tired lives near insult, but is not yet insult. It pretends concern while counting your steps. I nodded as if the word were a weather report. I turned to Daniel. I asked whether he had read the papers. He said Andrew had. He trusted Andrew. Andrew does this all the time. I felt the old ledger in my hands. I asked which clause prevented misuse. He blinked and looked to Vanessa as if she could locate the answer in her contacts list. I stood and went to the hutch. From the second drawer, I took the blue folder, the one with the tab Carl labeled. I set it on the table and squared the corners with my fingers. The notary ribbon lay across the top like a quiet boundary. I kept my voice soft so it would carry. Harold provided for me in ways you cannot imagine. You can take care of each other. But I do not need anyone to take care of me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Daniel's shoulders fell an inch as if air had been let out of a tire. Vanessa stared at the ribbon, then at my hands. She asked what was inside. I said what mattered. Protections Harold built. Instructions I am following. Counsel that is mine. Vanessa smiled. It did not reach her eyes. She said she was happy I had guidance, then added that none of that changed the wisdom of a simple signature. I slid a card beside the cups, white with a clean black line. I read it aloud so there would be no confusion. I never sign documents presented without counsel. All communications go through my attorney. Meetings are scheduled. Drafts are provided 48 hours in advance. That is my boundary. It is not up for negotiation. Vanessa's hand hovered above the card. She did not touch it. She said boundaries are wonderful. She said she respected mine. She said respect is a two-way bridge. Then she said this would be easier if I could show trust. The words slipped and hit the floor with a sound only I heard. Trust. As if it belonged to the side asking for a pen. I let my silence answer. It did more than any speech. Daniel finally reached for his tea. He forgot the sugar and drank anyway. He said he never wanted to hurt me. He said he wanted peace. I said peace is not always the same as obedience. He kept his eyes on the table and nodded as if the wood might forgive him. Vanessa shifted to a softer key. She spoke about holidays, about family photographs, about how stress fades when roles are clear. She said I deserved ease. I remembered the column of flowers at the reception and how ease had been arranged for the camera, not for me. I asked them to listen to one sentence without interrupting. I said I would continue to manage my house and my health as I have done. I would ask for help when I needed it. I would not sign blanket authority. And if a medical crisis ever came, the springing documents in the blue folder would speak with my voice. That is what Harold wanted. That is what I want now. I ended the sentence there and let the air hold it steady. Vanessa stood. She thanked me for the tea. She said she was sorry if she had pushed. She said Friday could wait. Daniel stayed seated and looked at my face, the way he used to study a map before a long drive. He asked if I was angry. I said no, I am careful. Careful is what kept this family whole when money was thin and days were long. He nodded slowly and placed the keys in his pocket. The ring made no sound this time. At the door, Vanessa said she hoped we could revisit this later. I said later belongs to people who respect today. She tried to laugh and then gave it up. They walked to the car. The maple shook once and steadied. I returned to the kitchen and sat. The tea was still warm. A faint curl of steam rose and vanished. I watched it fade and knew the balance had shifted. Harold's armor did not clang or shine. It made a quiet click the moment a door closed on the inside. After they left, I stayed at the table with the blue folder and the cooling tea and asked the question I had been avoiding. Can I forgive this? Should I cut my son off? The words sounded harsh in my own head. They tripped on the step between anger and grief. Forgiveness had always been a kitchen practice for me. Small acts repeated until a stain lifted. Cutting off felt like hauling the whole table to the curb. I sat very still and watched the steam vanish as if it were a demonstration of time. The house answered with its usual patience. Pipes sighed. The clock kept its stubborn rhythm. I walked to the sink, rinsed the cups, and folded the dish towel twice. My hands reached for Harold's old habits without asking me. Order first, then feeling. Still, the feeling would not wait. I leaned on the counter and let it rise. When Daniel was 6, he burned with a fever that would not break. Harold was on a delivery 2 towns over. The wind hammered the gutters. The power blinked and held. I made a nest on the living room floor with quilts and towels warmed in the dryer. Daniel's cheeks were the red of hard candy. I pressed the thermometer, wiped his hairline with a damp cloth, and whispered the plain promises mothers whisper when only the stove is listening. I will stay. I am here. My body remembers the weight of him that night, the way he curled against me like a heartbeat outside my chest. I counted breaths until they steadied. When the fever finally slid down, I cried into the quilt where he could not feel the shake. Morning brought cereal and cartoons. He did not remember the storm. I remembered it for both of us. That night taught me something I did not have words for until now. A mother holds the line when the child cannot. The line is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a fence with a working latch. You open it for the right reasons. You close it when the wind howls. Today, the wind howled in a polite voice with bullet points. Today, I closed the latch. But closing the latch is not the same as closing the heart. So again the question, can I forgive him? Forgiveness, as I understand it, is not a pardon. It is the refusal to build a shrine to injury. It lets the wound breathe without inviting the knife back in. I can forgive the weakness. I cannot issue a key to my life because for it. I have to live long enough to watch him learn the difference. I thought of the time he came home in 3rd grade with a rip in his backpack and a story that would not settle. He said the older boys grabbed his straps and spun him on the blacktop. He laughed when he told it, the laugh children use when they are testing if a hurt is allowed. The next morning, I walked him to school and watched the yard without speaking. The boys circled again and found my eyes first. I did not shout. I stepped between them and Daniel and said one sentence, "Find a different game." They did. He held my hand all the way to the door as if I had changed the weather. That is the mother I have always been. Quiet, but not absent. Clear, but not cruel. So what is the line now? It is legal paper, yes. The trust and proxies and the card Carl printed for my door. But it is also the words I will and will not say. I will not call Vanessa names. I will not rehearse speeches to win the room. I will not pretend this did not hurt. I will say, when Daniel asks again, that I am careful because careful kept us fed. I will say that love without boundaries becomes theater. I will say my signatures are not tokens of peace. They are the map of my life. No one else gets to hold the legend. Should I cut him off? The truth is, I do not know a clean way to sever the rope without losing myself in the fall. If he were a stranger, the answer would be simple. But love is not a contract you can cancel with a stamped envelope. It is a house you keep repairing because you remember the day you first put up the walls. Sometimes you stop using a room. You do not burn it down. I took Harold's plaid shirt from the chair and folded it again with the care of a ritual. The fabric still held a breath of his cologne, lemon, pine, a hint of soap. I asked him the question as if he had just walked into the kitchen and set his keys in the bowl. What would you do? I heard him say it the way he always did when the fix was both simple and hard. Check the latch. Check it again. Sleep. Decide in daylight. I wrote Daniel's name on an index card and below it 3 sentences I could say without shaking. I love you. I will not sign. I will always answer when you call me with respect. Then I put the card under a magnet shaped like an apple and let the words face the room like a small flag. The roses scratched the kitchen window, asking to be watered. I carried the can out and gave each bush a slow drink. Soil remembers. I could forgive the boy who twisted a key in his palm and wanted peace. I could forgive and still keep the gate closed until he learned to knock. That is the shape of my mercy. It has hinges. It swings. It holds. The house made its night noises. Pipes settled. The clock pressed out quarters like a stubborn metronome. I turned off every lamp, and still the kitchen held a pale square of moon at the sink. I stood in it as if it were a small ferry and let the water run cold. The day had been a field of fences. Now the night arrived with no gate. I dried my hands, walked down the hall, and opened the closet. Harold's plaid shirt waited on its hanger like a faithful dog. The cotton had thinned at the elbows. The collar held the faint shape of his neck. I pressed my face into the shoulder and breathed. Citrus, pine, soap. Ghost traces of a life that could fix anything with time and quiet. I carried the shirt to the bed and sat. The mattress tilted as if expecting his weight on the other side and finding none. I pulled my knees up and tucked the shirt beneath my chin. Up to that moment, I had cried like someone pretending not to. Tidy tears that could be mistaken for allergies. Now, whatever dam I had built with routine and lists and careful tea cracked straight through. A sound left me that surprised me. Not delicate, not polite. A deep, animal sob that shook the bed frame and made the lamp rattle. I clutched the shirt and said it out loud because whispering would not hold it. Do you see, Harold? We raised a son who no longer dares to look his mother in the eye. The sentence echoed off the wall and came back smaller, but it did not leave. I said it again, slower, as if truth were a nail that required a few sure strikes. I have fed him, walked floors with him, held fevers that would not break. I taught him to say please and to keep the bubble between the lines. And yet, when a storm came wearing a suit, he chose the forecast over the window. The room did not argue. The shirt did not soften the fact. My throat burned. My ribs ached where the crying pushed. I lay on my side and curled around the cotton. I made a harbor and called it Harold. I told him about Table 14, how flowers can be walls when people decide they are, how the planner forgot to measure a mother. I told him about the folder on our kitchen table, how a stranger used the word today like a threat, how Vanessa stacked care and control into the same sentence and asked me to sign under both. I told him I had stood my ground and that I hated how much it hurt to do it in front of our child. The crying came in waves, fury first, then shame for feeling fury at my own, then grief for the boy who used to press a damp forehead to my collarbone and fall asleep as if mothers were a kind of sky. I remembered the fever night, the whistle of wind in the vent, the way I promised him I would stay, how the promise did not require witnesses or signatures. I kept that promise tonight by guarding the line he will need later, when peace means something real. The clock marked another quarter. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling, where the streetlight drew a thin ladder of pale rectangles. I climbed them with my eyes until the ache in my chest eased to a low throb. I spoke to Harold as if he lay beside me and could catch each word before it fell. I told him I was afraid of becoming hard. I told him I was afraid of becoming a fool. I asked which fear he would choose if he had to carry one for a season. The room held the question like a guest who needed water. A gust moved the maple. A branch scraped the window with a sound like a match along a box. I closed my eyes and let the scrape repeat until it became a kind of lullaby. I pressed my palm flat on the shirt and felt the buttons against my skin. Small, round, ordinary, steadfast. I remembered sewing one back on while Harold read the paper aloud, the way work and love sat at the same table without ceremony. I told myself softness is not the enemy of strength. It is the reason strength matters. Another wave rose. I did not fight it. I let the sobs come until my breath frayed and then gathered again. When the tide receded, I spoke to the room in a voice I recognized as my own. I said I would not break myself to make his marriage easier. I said I would not turn my life into a cushion for someone else's fear. I said I would forgive him when I could and hold the latch closed until he learned to knock. The house listened. The clock kept time. I thought of morning as a shore I could reach if I floated and stopped kicking. I tucked the shirt under the pillow and smoothed the quilt. I did not feel brave. I felt emptied, rinsed, a bowl left to dry on the rack. The emptiness was not a threat. It was space for daylight to land. I turned off the last lamp and let the room go blue. I said goodnight to Harold as if he were just in the next room. I said thank you for the armor. I said keep watch while I sleep. Then I slept, not deeply, but honestly, with salt on my face and the cotton warm in my hands. Morning slid into the room before I opened my eyes, a pale ribbon across the dresser, quiet as apology. My face felt tight, salted. I sat up and touched the plaid shirt under the pillow. I folded it once and set it on the chair. No speeches to the empty room. Breath in, breath out, feet to the floor. In the kitchen, the kettle waited like a promise I could keep. I washed my face in the sink, water cold, and patted it dry with a towel that smelled of lemons. I watched my hands as if they belonged to someone I trusted. I measured loose tea, set the flame, and let sounds of morning build a scaffold. The clock, sparrows in the hedge, the refrigerator hum. When the kettle sighed, I poured and added a slice of ginger. I carried the mug to the back steps and watched the maple lace the light. The world had not changed. The truth had. I felt the ache without honoring it more than a nod. You can be tender and still choose steel. I said the day's work aloud. Call Carl. Sign what strengthens. Record what stands. Protect what breathes. Carl answered on the second ring. I told him I was ready to finish everything we outlined. His voice warmed, brisk, and kind. Good, he said. Meet me at 9. Bring your identification, the binder, and that calm you do better than anyone. I put on my navy cardigan, brushed my hair, and slipped the brass key into my pocket. At 9, I parked behind Carl's office, a bungalow with lilacs by the porch. Inside, a notary named Alma waited with her seal and a steady face. Carl spread the documents across a polished table like a map. Last pass, he said. We read, we sign, we seal, we record. We began with the deed. He slid forward a transfer to the trust and the county memorandum. I read every line. My name looked back like horizon. I signed, slow and legible. Alma notarized in careful strokes. The stamp pressed, lifted, a sound like a soft gavel. Red ink bloomed on the page. Next came the updated healthcare documents and HIPAA release. We confirmed Clara's contact. We initialed the paragraph, requiring 2 physicians for incapacity. We kept the springing power intact. No open doors, Carl said. Only doors that open when you ask. I signed. Alma sealed. Crimson circles gathered like small moons. We reviewed my will and the strengthened no contest clause. Carl added a brief letter of intent about the house and garden, my wish that the roses remain. It will not bind a court, he said, but it will bind consciences. I signed. Alma sealed. County recorder, Carl said. Then the bank, then your physician's office. 3 stops. We gathered the packet into a binder, each tab labeled in a font Harold would have called sensible. At the recorder's office, the clerk took our number. The lobby smelled like rubber mats and copies. When our turn came, the clerk scanned the deed and memorandum, placed them on a pad, and stamped them with a square red seal. Thud, lift, thud. The sound satisfied something deep. Not theatrical, official. Recorded, she said, sliding a receipt under the glass. I thanked her as if she had returned something I had dropped. At the bank, the manager led us into a room with frosted glass. Carl spoke until I needed to. Then I did. We set the voice password. We added a note that changes require in-person visits with 2 employees present. We confirmed beneficiaries and payable on death forms aligned with the trust. The manager printed a summary and asked about a safe deposit box. Yes, I said. He handed me a slender key. I liked its weight. Ordinary and final. Our last stop was my doctor's office. The receptionist scanned the proxy and HIPAA release and verified Clara's number. If the day comes, she said, we will call who you asked us to call. Another red stamp, another small thud. Back at Carl's office, we sat a moment in the quiet, binder between us, like a finished roof. Carl poured coffee from his thermos and handed me a cup. You did everything right, he said. People confuse loud with strong. What you did is strong. I looked at the tabs, the seals, the signatures, lined like stitches. Strength, I thought, is paperwork that does not tremble when someone knocks. I stood and slipped the binder into my tote. I felt the brass key against my hip. In the doorway, I planted the words I needed to live by. I will not cry anymore today. I will stand firm by the red seal. Carl nodded as if I had sworn a binding oath. Outside, the air smelled like lilacs and car exhaust. The day carried on with its errands and its buses, and lives of people who would never know that a woman had secured her life with ink and patience. I set the binder on the passenger seat and rested a hand on it for a second. Then I drove home, steady in the lane, past the hardware store where I used to balance other people's days, toward my own front door, where a card now waited to speak for me before my mouth ever had to open. I saw them before they saw me. Vanessa and her mother, Marjorie, standing by a white SUV outside the pharmacy. The windows were down. March air carried every word across the lot. I had come for stamps and aspirin. I stayed because truth sometimes arrives when people think no one is listening. Vanessa held her phone like a stone. Marjorie gripped the wheel with both hands as if leverage could fix a bill. "We cannot keep floating balances," Marjorie said. "The planner wants another payment. The florist says the card bounced. Jenna's husband is asking about the money we borrowed for the venue." Vanessa's voice thinned. "It is temporary. Andrew said if Diane signs, Daniel can consolidate. We can roll the cards, clear the wedding, pay the retainer. I just need her to stop being difficult." Marjorie clicked her tongue. Difficult is a word people use when they meet a boundary. The boutique is behind 3 months. The landlord wants certified funds. Your student loans were deferred but end this quarter. "I know," Vanessa whispered. "I wake up every night with my teeth locked. I cannot breathe until morning. Andrew says it is standard. Everyone does power of attorney now. It keeps elders safe. I am trying to make us safe." Safe bent like a wire under weight. Marjorie exhaled. "We built an image, and now we have to pay for the frame. I warned you about champagne taste. Daniel is kind but soft. You are steering this. Steer well." Vanessa pressed her fist to her mouth. "I never plan to beg an old woman. I am not a thief. I just need a door to open." A boy pushed a line of carts. Metal rang against metal. I stepped behind the newspaper rack. I did not want to be seen or force a performance. This was not theater. It was weather finally speaking. Marjorie lowered her voice. "You will apologize. You will smile on Friday. You will tell her it is love. Use the word care. It tests well." Vanessa shook her head. She looked at me like glass. I could see myself, and I did not like the view. They drove off without seeing me. I walked into the pharmacy and bought my stamps and aspirin. At the counter, I asked for 2 sheets of red forever stamps. The clerk said hearts or flags. I chose flags. Back in the lot, the wind tasted like rain. I did not feel pity strong enough to bend my line. Desperation is not virtue. It is only speed. I understood Vanessa a little more. That did not make her right. I slid the stamps into my wallet and told myself the same sentence I had told Daniel. Peace without respect is theater. I will not act ever. I can offer empathy without surrender, depth without permission. She is not a monster. She is a mirror of hunger. A mirror does not get my keys. I went home and made tea slowly. The next morning, I took the binder and a manila envelope to the post office. The sky was a dull sheet. I parked, locked the door, and stood a moment with my hand on the handle. A door is a choice. You can linger or you can step through. I stepped. Inside, the line was long enough to measure a life. A toddler banged a roll of tape on the counter. A man in a denim jacket filled out a money order. The fluorescent lights hummed. I filled the address in careful print. County recorder, bank compliance, doctor. Patel's office. I slid the documents in and sealed the flap with a firm palm. Paper is shy. It behaves when you are sure. When my turn came, the clerk looked up with the weary cheer of someone who has seen everything. I asked for certified mail with return receipt. She handed me the green forms and a pen on a chain. I pressed my name, the addresses, and the tracking numbers until the ink looked like it meant it. She stamped the tops and peeled the barcodes like stamps for machines. "Anything fragile?" she asked. "Only my future," I said, and she smiled without looking surprised. She weighed the envelope, the scale blinked, she typed, the register chirped. "Sign here," she said, sliding the pad. I signed the way Carl taught me, slow and legible, no flourish to imitate. The red date stamp met the corner with a satisfying thud. Official, final enough for today. I bought a strip of flag stamps for ordinary letters and tucked them beside the certified receipts. The clerk handed me the tracking slips and the green postcards for signatures. "Put these on your fridge," she said. "They come back, when delivered." I thought of the apple magnet holding my 3 sentences for Daniel and nodded. On the way out, I felt the cool metal of the handle again. Threshold, I thought. You cross, you claim. The door closed behind me with that hollow federal sound. I stood on the steps and looked at the envelope sliding into a canvas bin. Out of my hands, into the stream. That is how power works when you choose process over persuasion. In the car, I photographed the receipts and sent them to Carl. Mailed and recorded. He sent back a thumbs up and one line. "Good doors today." I laughed once, the quick kind that resets a chest. I started the engine, checked my mirrors, and merged into traffic without apology. At home, I taped the tracking slips inside the cabinet where I keep flour and sugar. I like my victories where I can reach them while making tea. Then I carried the binder to the safe, turned the brass key, and listened for the soft click that says, "Welcome back." On the way to the kitchen, I touched the door frame with my fingertips. Another threshold kept. Another small oath kept by ink and seal. For now. Sunday after service, the fellowship hall smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. Folding tables wore plastic cloths. The choir ladies arranged paper plates with care. I stood near the bulletin board when Clara hooked her arm through mine. "Come," she said. "You need to hear something." She led me to a round table where 3 women sat. Ruth had a blue scarf. Bernice wore sturdy shoes and a bright diamond. Althea kept the altar ledger. They made room without fuss, as if my chair had always been there. Ruth spoke first. "We heard you held your line," she said. "Word travels by pie." Bernice nodded. "Men bring hammers, women bring forms." Althea slid a napkin toward me. "Sugar cake," she said. "Eat while we talk." Clara told them the outline. A bride with a lawyer. The promise of care hiding a signature that would make me small. She did not use names. The women nodded the way people do when they already know the song. Bernice sipped her coffee. "My nephew tried that after Charlie died," she said. "He cried about scammers, said he would protect me, asked for a spare key. I gave him a copy of my will and a ride home instead." Ruth smiled. "My daughter wanted me to move in. I told her I would come for Thanksgiving and leave with my dignity." Althea opened her ledger and showed me a page with 3 lines. "No on the doorstep. No by phone. Yes, only with a witness." Something shifted behind my ribs. Not relief. Recognition. Clara squeezed my hand under the table and looked at me like a lighthouse looks at water. I kept my voice low. "Thank you," I said. I was starting to think I was foolish for needing paper. Ruth leaned in. "Paper is how quiet people speak in loud rooms," she said. "You did the brave thing." Bernice tilted her diamond toward the lights and grinned. "Shiny means nothing without a clasp. You kept yours closed." Althea tore a strip from her bulletin and wrote a number. "A social worker comes on Tuesdays," she said. "Free clinic. She teaches how to freeze credit and dodge tricks. Come if you want. The younger women should hear you." I did not promise. I smiled. I am not a banner. I am a porch light. But my eyes felt lit from within. Around us, the ladies refilled coffee. Children chased each other between folding chairs. Someone tuned the old piano. Ordinary holiness. A world proceeding as if it can be kind. Clara touched my elbow. "You see," she whispered, "you are not alone." I looked at the circle and felt the truth settle. A chorus can catch a note a soloist cannot hold forever. I folded the napkin, tucked the number in my wallet, and stood. Outside, the bell rang noon. I walked to the door and opened it for the woman behind me. The hinge sang like a small amen. I breathed and believed. He knocked mid-afternoon. No car in the driveway, no shadow behind him. When I opened the door, Daniel stood small in a jacket too thin for the wind, keys clenched in his fist. He looked past me, as if the clock could argue for him. We sat at the kitchen table, where the steam from the kettle lifted like a veil. "Mom, Vanessa is furious," he said, voice unsteady. "I do not know what to do." I folded my hands. "I hear you. She says you embarrassed us. She says you do not trust family. She says I need to protect our future." I let the silence count to 5. "I am protecting mine," I said, "and in time, that protects yours." He rubbed his brow. "She will not let it go unless you sign something. Anything." "I will not." He stared at the spoon between us. "Why does this feel like war?" "Because peace built on surrender is not peace," I said. "You worry about losing face. I worry about losing myself. Losing face can be repaired. Losing myself cannot." He looked up. His eyes shone, not with anger, but with the terror of a boy who just learned the difference between wanting calm and being brave. "She says I am weak if I do not make this happen." "You are not weak for refusing harm," I said. "You are only weak if you know a thing is wrong and do it anyway." He exhaled, long and low. "What should I tell her?" "Tell her the boundary is firm. Tell her I have counsel. Tell her love without consent is control by another name." He nodded, then winced. "She will leave if I do not deliver. Then you will face loss honestly, not by stealing safety from your mother." He flinched. Then he reached for my hand and stopped halfway. "I wanted to be the son who made everything smooth." "You can still be the son who tells the truth," I said. "That is smoother in the long run." He swallowed. "Are you angry with me?" "I am clear," I said. "Clarity can feel like anger when you are used to fog." He managed a thin smile. "You always talk like the weather. It is how I survived storms." We stood. At the door, he hesitated. "Can I come by tomorrow if things are bad?" "You can come by tomorrow if things are good," I said. "Either way, you knock." He nodded. The keys no longer rattled. He stepped onto the porch, shoulders heavier, spine a touch straighter. I watched him walk to the street and speak to no one. Inside, the kettle clicked off. I poured fresh tea and listened to the house breathe, steady and proud. On the chair, the plaid shirt waited. I touched the cuff, and heard Harold's advice rise. Hold your line. Speak in full sentences. Do not rush mercy. In the window's glare, I saw my face. Not hard, just whole at last. There was no courthouse, no reporters, no grand speech. My victory lived on paper and in the weight of a brass key. The blue binder sat on the table. The red seals looked like small suns. My hand steady, my breath even. I checked the mailbox. Return receipts waited like green birds. Signed, dated, delivered. Carl's text was brief. All recorded. I pinned the receipts on the corkboard above the phone. The house seemed taller by an inch, as if the roof trusted the walls again. I brewed tea and set 2 cups, one for me and one for the memory I love. On the chair, Harold's plaid shirt held its post. I took his letter from the folder and placed it beside the cup. "This is armor, not bragging," he wrote. The sentence had carried me through every room this week. Now it settled like a blanket folded just right. I opened the back door and let the yard air in. No music, no applause. The roses needed deadheading. The fence needed a nail. Life kept its ordinary list. I stood on the threshold and felt how the hinge moved clean. That is what the seal had done. It did not make me powerful. It removed the wobble. Power is not noise. It is a door that does not rattle when the wind insists. I sat and signed one last page for Carl's file. Date, full name, clear hand. Alma's seal would meet it later. I closed the binder with a steady palm. No flourish, no second guessing. My breath found its own rhythm. The phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. I told her, "She is angry. I am coming by later." I answered with a simple yes and no lecture. Quiet victory does not perform. It proceeds. I wiped the table with a cloth that smelled of lemon. I put Harold's letter back inside its sleeve and smoothed the crease. Then I folded the shirt, aligned the buttons, and laid it next to the binder, a flag and its pole. I felt not triumph, but alignment. My life and my will sat in the same place. I walked to the porch with my tea. The steps were cool, the rail warm where the sun had begun. Birds stitched noise into the hedge. I took a breath that traveled all the way down and back. I said the line aloud because the house deserved to hear it. The greatest victory is signing in the right place, then stepping onto the porch. No one cheered. A squirrel scolded me for moving his root. I laughed, the quick kind that does not need company. I sipped again. Across the street, a neighbor dragged a trash bin. A bus sighed at the corner. I was simply a woman with paperwork in order, a fence that held, a kitchen that knew my name. I did not win against anyone. I won for myself and for the quiet that keeps a life intact. Evening laid gold across the garden, a calm glaze over leaves and fence lines. I carried my tea to the bench beside the roses. The petals held road dust. A ladybug walked the rim of my cup like a careful surveyor. I loosened the soil around a root with the handle of a spoon and let my shoulders settle. I remembered the wedding and that tall column of flowers. I sat hidden while the cameras found better angles. Tonight, the flowers frame me on my own terms. No seating chart, no planner, just my yard, my breath, my name. I spoke toward the quiet that still holds Harold. I am all right now. The armor you left fits. The house is signed and sealed, steady as a good fence. Our son is learning where courage begins. I will not carry his lessons for him. I will keep the porch light on. A breeze lifted the hedge, and the air smelled like cut grass and promises kept. A neighbor passed with a dog. We traded a small wave that says, "I see you." The garden hummed. The world proceeded without greed. Silence can be bright when it is honest. I set Harold's letter on my lap and the plaid shirt beside me, not as trophies, as anchors. When sorrow visits again, it will find me here, not hiding. I will make 2 cups and choose sentences that do not harm me to say. That is how I will live the time that remains. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know where you are watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Tell me in the comments. I read every note with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not only to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. Remember that sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you feel ready to open your heart. Take care, and I will see you in the next story. The sun slid behind the maple and drew a clean line along the fence. I stood and watered the roses the way Harold taught me, close to the roots, no splash on leaves. When I finished, the garden smelled like rain, though the sky was clear. I carried the empty cup inside, turned the brass key, and heard the soft click of a life that keeps its promises. I once sat hidden behind flowers that were not mine. Now I sit with flowers that are mine and speak without raising my voice. My silence belongs to me, and it travels farther than any shout. I am home, and the door is open